Chapter 1, Bourgeois and Proletarians. Imagine opening a book where history itself is a drama, with two main characters locked in eternal conflict. That's exactly how Marx and Engels begin. They tell us, all of human history is the history of class struggles. Not kings, not inventions, not wars, but conflict between groups of people with different economic interests. The grand pattern of history. They give us a quick tour through time. In ancient societies, it was masters versus slaves. In medieval Europe, it was lords versus serfs. In guild towns, it was craftsmen versus journeymen. Always, oppressor versus oppressed. But here's the twist: each time one class rose up and overthrew another, society changed form, yet the struggle remained. So, history is like a stage play where the costumes change, but the conflict never ends. Enter the bourgeoisie. Now, in the modern world, the mid-19th century when the Manifesto was written, a new dominant class has risen, the bourgeoisie. Who are they? Not nobles, not kings, but the middle-class merchants, industrialists, factory owners, bankers, the people who control trade, capital, and industry. They were born when feudalism began to collapse. The discovery of the New World, the expansion of global trade, the growth of colonies, and the Industrial Revolution gave them enormous power. They dethroned the feudal lords by building wealth not from land, but from production and commerce. The bourgeoisie, Marx says, is the most revolutionary class in history up to that point. Why? Because they completely transformed society. They destroyed feudal traditions. They built cities. They created global markets. They turned every corner of the earth into part of their supply chain, the world remade. Here's where the writing turns almost poetic. Marx and Engels describe how the bourgeoisie reshaped human life. Old customs and values are shattered. Everything is reduced to what they call cash payment. Friendships, loyalties, traditions, all secondary to profit. Nations are drawn together into one system. Globalization begins. Cotton from India, sugar from the Caribbean, machines from England, markets everywhere. Industries constantly change. The bourgeoisie can't survive unless they revolutionize technology and production. So they create a restless, ever-changing world, new machines, new markets, new consumer desires. This is why capitalism feels so fast, so unstable, so exhilarating. It is always in motion. The birth of the proletariat. But every action has its counterforce. As the bourgeoisie grew rich, a new class grew alongside them, the proletariat, the working class. These are factory workers, miners, mill hands, urban laborers. They own no land, no capital, no tools, only their labor power, which they must sell to survive. They live by wages, which are kept low so profits stay high. At first, workers are scattered and weak. They might riot, smash machines, the Luddites, or fight against individual bosses. But over time, Marx says, the very logic of capitalism pushes them closer together. Factories gather thousands of workers under one roof. Machines reduce workers to interchangeable parts. Workers begin to see they share the same struggles. And so, they begin to organize, forming unions, parties, and movements. Why this clash is inevitable. Marx and Engels insist that the struggle between bourgeoisie and proletariat is the final great conflict of history. Why? The bourgeoisie constantly revolutionizes production, but this creates cycles of boom and bust, crises where markets collapse, goods pile up, and workers are thrown into misery. Each crisis shows that capitalism can't control its own forces. Meanwhile, the proletariat grows in number, unity, and awareness. So, the contradiction sharpens. The bourgeoisie creates its own gravedigger, the proletariat. Just as feudal lords were swept away, so too the bourgeoisie will fall. The drama ends in revolution. The chapter closes with thunder. The bourgeoisie has accomplished incredible things, but it has also unleashed forces it cannot control. In its own rise to power, it has created the very class that will overthrow it. The struggle between bourgeoisie and proletariat can end only in revolution, in the victory of the working class, and the abolition of bourgeois rule. Chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. Clearing the stage, who are the communists? Marx and Engels begin with a crucial clarification. Communists are not some strange, separate sect of radicals. They are not a tiny club with their own agenda. Instead, they are the most advanced, most conscious part of the proletariat. They fight not for themselves, but for the entire working class. Their advantage lies in having a clearer understanding of the struggle and its ultimate direction. So, communists are like the scouts and strategists of the workers' movement, not outsiders, but its most committed fighters. The communist goals. What do they want? The answer is blunt and simple. The abolition of bourgeois private property. This sounds shocking, so Marx and Engels immediately clarify. They don't mean abolishing all property. Personal items, things you use every day, your shoes, your books, these are not the target. What they mean is the abolition of private property in the means of production, factories, land, machines, capital, all the resources by which wealth is created. Why? Because in capitalism, these are monopolized by a small class, the bourgeoisie, while the majority, the proletariat, have nothing but their labor. In effect, private property equals the power of a few to live off the labor of the many. Property, freedom, and illusions. At this point, Marx and Engels confront the bourgeois objections head on. Objection 1: You want to abolish freedom. The authors respond, bourgeois freedom is really just the freedom to buy and sell, the freedom to exploit, the freedom of the rich to get richer. True freedom, they argue, will only exist when people are not enslaved to wages or markets. Objection 2: You want to abolish individuality. No, they reply. Capitalism already destroys individuality, it reduces everyone to a cog in the machine, valued only by their ability to produce and consume. Communism, by removing exploitation, will allow people to develop as whole human beings. Objection 3: You want to abolish culture and education. They answer, under capitalism, culture and education are monopolized by the ruling class and shaped to serve its interests. Communism seeks to make education universal and free, and culture a shared inheritance of all humanity. So, Marx and Engels turn each accusation upside down. What the bourgeois call freedom or individuality is, in fact, a mask for exploitation. Family, nation, and morality. This is the part that really rattled 19th century readers. Marx and Engels go after sacred institutions. The family, they argue that in bourgeois society, the family is really about property and inheritance, passing wealth down through generations. Working class families, by contrast, are constantly disrupted by poverty and exploitation. Communism seeks to end the economic basis of family oppression, not to abolish human relationships. Nationality, the bourgeois accuse communists of being unpatriotic. Marx and Engels respond, workers have no country in capitalism. Their interests are international. A French worker and a German worker have more in common than either has with their own bourgeoisie. Communism, therefore, is inherently internationalist. Morality and religion, bourgeois morality, they argue, is built on property and class interest. Communism will bring a new morality, based not on exploitation but on real human solidarity. The program, what communists propose. Finally, the chapter shifts from argument to actionable program. Marx and Engels list immediate measures that a workers' state might adopt once the proletariat seizes power. These include abolition of property and land, rents used for public purposes, a heavy progressive income tax, abolition of inheritance rights, confiscation of property of rebels and emigrants, centralization of credit in a national bank controlled by the state, centralization of transport and communication, expansion of state-owned factories and agriculture, obligation of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, abolition of the distinction between town and country, ending urban-rural inequality, free education for all children, plus abolition of child labor in factories. These are not yet the final goal, they are transitional steps to dismantle bourgeois power and empower the working class. The bigger picture. The chapter ends with a sweeping point. Communism is not about tearing down society for chaos's sake. It is about unlocking human potential by ending exploitation. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest all capital from the bourgeoisie, centralize production, and organize society so that everyone's development enriches all. In other words, a new form of society is possible, and it is international, collective, and free. Chapter 3, Socialist and Communist Literature. The landscape of socialism. In the 19th century, socialism was not one thing. It was a buzzing marketplace of ideas, everyone was proposing schemes to solve poverty and inequality. Some were dreamers, some were reformers, and some were defenders of the old order. Marx and Engels step into this noisy scene and start categorizing. They divide these schools of thought into three big groups. Reactionary socialism, conservative or bourgeois socialism, critical utopian socialism and communism. 1. Reactionary socialism. This category is about looking backward, movements that wanted to solve the problems of industrial society by retreating into the past. They break it down into three types. A. Feudal socialism. This was the ideology of old aristocrats, nobles, landowners, monarchists, who hated the rising bourgeoisie. They pretended to sympathize with the plight of workers, but their real motive was nostalgia for feudal times, when they were the masters. They published bitter critiques of capitalism, sometimes even elegant ones, but Marx and Engels exposed the hypocrisy. The aristocracy didn't care about the people, they just wanted their own power back. In short, wolves in sheep's clothing. B. Petty bourgeois socialism. This came from small shopkeepers, artisans, and farmers who were being crushed between big capital and industrialization. Their socialism was filled with anxiety and resentment. They wanted to turn back the clock to a world of small-scale producers. Problem? That world was already dying. Their vision was too narrow, too nostalgic, unable to provide a real future. C. German or true socialism. Unique to Germany at the time. Here, socialism had been imported from France but transformed by German philosophers into something abstract and academic. Instead of being a call to revolution, it turned into literary philosophy, endless speculation with little action. Marx and Engels are harsh. They say it was more about wordplay and self-satisfaction than about the workers' real struggles. Summary of reactionary socialism. These groups criticize capitalism, but none can move forward. They are too tied to dead or dying classes, nobles, peasants, petty bourgeois, to lead the future. 2. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. This one's particularly juicy. It's about the bourgeoisie themselves trying to sound socialist. Think of factory owners writing pamphlets about workers' rights, or bankers funding reforms to make capitalism gentler. They admit capitalism has problems: poverty, inequality, instability. But instead of abolishing capitalism, they want to patch it up. Their dream is a capitalism without struggle, profit for the rich, but comfort for the poor. Marx and Engels mock this as a wish for the bourgeoisie without the proletariat. They point out that these reforms always stop short of challenging the foundations of the system: private property, wage labor, and exploitation. In modern terms, this is like corporate social responsibility or billionaires talking about inclusive capitalism. Nice words, but they keep the system intact. 3. Critical utopian socialism and communism. Finally, Marx and Engels turned to some of the earliest socialists, people who weren't tied to the old classes, but who tried to imagine completely new social orders. These included figures like Saint-Simon, France; Fourier, France; Owen, England. What did they do? They looked at the misery of early industrial society and proposed visionary communities where cooperation, equality, and harmony would replace greed and exploitation. Owen, for example, set up experimental communities where workers shared resources. Fourier imagined fantastical communes where work was pleasurable and desires freely expressed. Marx and Engels actually give these thinkers respect. They were pioneers. They exposed the brutality of capitalism and dreamed of a world beyond it. But here's the problem. They had no connection to the actual class struggle. Their solutions were utopian blueprints, dependent on persuasion, generosity, or isolated experiments. They failed to see that only the collective power of the proletariat could transform society on a global scale. So, Marx and Engels honor them as visionaries, but insist, the time of utopias is over. Now comes scientific socialism, rooted in real class struggle. Wrapping up Chapter 3. The entire chapter is like Marx and Engels sweeping away the clutter of false or outdated ideas. Reactionary socialism equals tied to the past. Bourgeois socialism equals fake reformism. Utopian socialism equals admirable but impractical. What's left? Communism, the only movement that truly understands history, that represents the real interests of the proletariat, and that has the means to transform society.